organization, very inclusive during decision making. So yeah, over to you, Joyce.
Thank you so much. So also thank you to Keela for making this all possible. It's so much of a lift to do an online workshop, and to be able to just show up and present is a real gift. So thank you. So my name is Mer. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm going to be doing a training on inclusive decision making. For those who are not watching, I am a white woman with a short salt and pepper haircut. The side of my head is shaved, and I'm sitting in my home with pictures of plants behind me on the wall. I'm now going to start sharing. Do I want to continue? Yes. And okay. So I'm going to assume that you can all see. So we're going to do an inclusive intro to inclusive decision making to increase equity and power. I'm doing that from the Suquamish, Duwamish, and Stillaguamish lands, which is present day Seattle. And we actually had someone in the chat already share the indigenous peoples that live where you live. So if you would like to share that in the chat as well, that would be great. And I'll look in the chat and read some of those out. And also thank you to the entire nation of Canada for creating nativeland.ca. In the US, we use it all the time. So it's really an amazing resource. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, Kimberly. So yeah, I don't see anyone else sharing their native lands. And I know that Ishay already shared what Sharon wrote. So, here we go. Oh, thank you, Marnie. Indigenous Peoples Day is June 21st. And we have a specific acknowledgement from Alberta. Thank you so much. Includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda Nations. And hopefully one day we will learn in our public schools in the US how to pronounce Indigenous words. So I apologize for not pronouncing them. Anna, Kwantlen, Katsi, and Semiyang Nations, Treaty 7 territory, Dwayne. Anishinaabe, I think we also have in the US. Neutral, interesting. Time of pronunciation, yeah. So thank you so much for helping me out with that acknowledgement. And yes, please do keep showing in the chat. So what we're going to do today, I'm going to define inclusive decision making. We're going to try some breakouts in Jitsi, and just do an opening reflection in a small group. Then we're going to do kind of a digging deeper, why inclusive decision making matters, how it's a continuum. So it's not that a decision is inclusive or exclusive. It's usually somewhere in between, and we can always move toward more inclusion. And then some practical tactics for making any given decision more inclusive. And we're going to end with a brainstorm about how to actually make a decision more inclusive that is happening in your lives right now. And I guess we can also do some Q&A at the end, since Ishay said that we were going to do that. So I guess first off, any questions about the agenda before I get into it? And I do have the chat open. Okay, I will move forward. So yes, community agreements. I think you may not even be able to speak in this version of Zoom. So mute your mic may not be relevant. Also, camera off seems not to be relevant because I can't see any of you. Take space, make space. I guess that would be in the chat. So if you tend to be quiet, speak up. If you tend to speak up, make space for others. Center learning and growth. Curiosity, gentle with yourself and others as we learn new things. Are there any other community agreements that you all like that I haven't? Oh, you can let people speak. Oh, good. I just got a message from Ishay. So any other community agreements that you like to use in meetings, but that I haven't mentioned here? I would love to see them in the chat. And I know I am also like prompting you and then waiting like 15 seconds. So I apologize. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Montserrat. Oh, Montserrat. I feel like I know Montserrat. Yes, I think I do know Montserrat. Hi, Montserrat, also from Seattle. Okay, so I'm going to assume that these community agreements work. Oh, Marnie, I would like these agreements for my in-house training. May I use them? Oh, yes, you may. Yeah, if you feel like crediting them, that would be great. I did credit where I got these. So Brene Brown, Adrian Maureen Brown, and Resource Media. So if you credit the credits as well as Do Big Good, that would be great. Yeah, I'm glad you like them so much. We think a lot about our community agreements. Okay, so we'll continue. Do Big Good. So very quickly, we train and facilitate inclusive decisions. We're a 4-person team. That is, some of us are in Seattle, one of us is in South Africa, and one of us is in Orlando. And we use co-design to facilitate inclusive decisions. And we work with private and public and social sector organizations across the US and around the world. And so let's get into the content. What is an inclusive decision? So I'm going to give an example of what that could be. So inclusive decision is an agreement about future action in which those most affected by the action define the action. So in the past, I've actually changed this definition. So in the past, I said those affected by the action are included in deciding the action, but I've actually changed it that those most affected are the ones deciding the action, which I think pushing beyond what we usually do these days, which is whoever has more power gets to decide what happens next, regardless of how they're impacted. So any feedback or thoughts on this definition, if you would change it in some way? I'll just give another bit of information, which is that those who are affected by the action are the stakeholders. So I'll use that term also throughout the training. Welcome, Tanisha. Cool. So that's a definition we're working with during this training. And also sometimes it's helpful to see a definition in a different way. So this is a visual representation of inclusive decision making. So you want to maximize the overlap between people affected by a decision and people making a decision. So ideally, that the decision is entirely made by people who are affected. And in the worst case scenario, people affected are not making the decision at all. So you can kind of think of that as something that is, the overlap is mobile and you want to maximize the overlap. And of course, to be attentive to marginalization and power dynamics when considering who is affected, right? Because there's historic reasons why people might not be in a room or might not be considered to be, oh, we should invite or ask this group. So now that we've just defined why we're here, we're going to try some breakouts. And I think, let's see how many people we have. 33. Okay, great. So I think let's do 7 minutes. I will keep a timer. And you're going to just say with the people in your group, your name, pronoun, location, organization. You're going to say whether you're a morning or night person and what you like to do during that time, just a little icebreaker. And then you're going to share why inclusive decisions matter, right? So if we're trying to make an argument to someone who say isn't in this training, why would we say that inclusive decisions matter now that we have the definition? So Ishay, if you could drop the links, great, perfect, into the chat. So that's for your last name is what room you'll be dropped into, and you should be able to go right into it. They may ask to access your microphone and camera, but otherwise you should not need any sign in. So yeah, and if you don't feel like participating, you can of course stay here, but we'll actually be going back to the small groups later in the session. So it would be helpful to do that. So I will actually start the timer if you'd like to leave and go into the small group session for 7 minutes, and I will pause my mic. I'll still be looking at chat, but yeah, I enjoy getting to know each other and talking about why inclusive decisions matter. So thank you. Kevin, I'm happy to receive your question if you want to type it as well, or okay, great. All right, see you in 4 minutes. Okay. So time to come back to the main room. Hope you enjoyed your breakouts, and we'll share the links again. So if you want to close those tabs, if that would be easier, you can do that. So yeah, I would love to hear with a raised hand or with the chat. What did you come up with for why do inclusive decisions matter? What is their value? So what did you come up with? And you can raise your hand, you can type in the chat. What did you come up with? Maybe people didn't get time to get to that session. Freedom. Ooh, nice. Nothing about us without us. Yes, that is very much a great expression of inclusive decision making. Human rights, stakeholder buy-in. Yep. Autonomy, empowerment, getting buy-in. Yep. The practical reasons to frame, build client-centered services and best meet the needs, right, of people you're serving and supporting, right? So you actually information, receiving that information. Human rights issues, decisions made on behalf of people, this empowers them, which makes them more vulnerable. Yes, it increases exploitation. That's a really good point, John. Yes, it doesn't just replicate past exploitation, it actually it increases it by excluding again. That's a really good point. Inter-programming services are relevant. Yeah, so the information again. So information, rights, empowerment, and also the idea that it's doing new harm to exclude. Yeah. Work is environmental based. So this question is really interesting because of how I make decisions for more than human. Oh, yes. Yeah, I think about that too. Christina. Yeah, right. Because we're trying to advocate for the natural world, but how do we, that's still speaking for. This is great. So this next section is going to go really quick because you basically have all the things I have in this section and then also some new ones. What it feels like to have decisions made about your life body without you, it can help highlight how devastating it can be to be partially in that cycle, right? How can you find empathy with the people who are not in the room? Yeah. So as you said, power and empowerment, if we want to share power, we need to decide inclusively. And this is a quote from Cindy Suarez, from her book, The Power Manual, which I recommend, but she actually says power is participation in decision-making. So it is, the ability to decide what is next, to decide the future. And then also this idea of information. So inclusivity increases accuracy. So this is a quote from an economist, and he's basically saying, doesn't matter how many people you have, if they all have the same opinion, you're actually not going to, it's unlikely that you'll have an accurate result. But if you have multiple perspectives, it's statistically more likely that you'll get a correct result. And as an illustration of that, there's this activity which you can use if this would be helpful with others. So you have a picture, something like this, and you have a prompt like, to see this landscape, where would you want 5 people to stand, right? So you already have multiple different individuals, multiple different perspectives available. And it's like, where would you want to sit down to fully see this landscape? And yeah, I guess if you feel like going through this activity, where would you want your team to stand to most fully see this landscape? If anyone wants to just say in the chat how they would respond to that. Five different places. Yeah. Yeah. In a mountain valley. Okay. Different places, lots of perspectives. Yeah, so I think some people, I don't know, some people might think, oh, also like I want to be in the sky, right? Like I want to be flying overhead, because that's the thing where you could maybe see everything, but then of course you're not going to see the detail, right? So yeah, generally, if you give people this exercise, they will have a more intuitive understanding about the value of multiple perspectives. Cool. So other benefits. So this is group buy-in, shared understanding, early identification of obstacles. And this is pretty much what people were saying in the chat. Increased commitment. Yeah, I don't know if that necessarily needs more explanation, but yeah, other benefits. Okay. So just a brief note about inclusion not being binary, being a continuum. So this is an example of a kind of from earlier in the pandemic. I should probably have a new example, but this idea that it's not inclusive or exclusive, that's somewhere in between. So you get something low inclusion where you have executive director making a decision and asking feedback from a manager, right? So it's still not totally exclusive because a person's making a decision and they're getting feedback, right? But then you could be more inclusive by saying, having a group of managers and giving opinions and being attentive to intersections of race and gender and age and disability and parental responsibility, right? Because work from home, parental responsibility would be a meaningful intersection in that kind of decision. And so that is more inclusive, right? And then you could think, oh, you could be even more inclusive, right? You could engage the entire organization and use synchronous and asynchronous co-design feedback activities so that everyone can give their opinion depending on their availability and interest, right? And maybe there's even something that's even more inclusive than that. So just this idea that it's a sliding scale, and it's not like it's all or nothing. There's always room for growth or for increasing inclusion. Okay, so tactics, practical tactics for increasing inclusion wherever you may be, whatever decision you may be making. So this is a self-prompt for managers. So at every phase of a decision-making process to ask, will this action increase or decrease trust between myself and my stakeholders? And that if you feel like you're not sure, right, that you can turn up these things in Do Be Good. We call them trust dials. So the trust dials that we've identified are transparency, flexibility, and follow through. So that means that plans, information, opportunities for input are accessible and comprehensible to all stakeholders. That flexibility means that stakeholder feedback requests and needs are integrated, that there's a know better, do better ethos of filling blind spots, righting harms, making restitution, and then following through on that there's follow through and then also communication of follow through. So if you've been attentive to a stakeholder and made a change based on their request, but then they don't know about that, then you're not getting the benefit of increased trust and increased collaboration in the future. So this is one tactic, are these trust dials. Then we also have birds of a feather. So if everyone matches, someone is missing. So to take action if everyone in a meeting looks or sounds the same. And then calling in who's not at the table using phrases like, I wonder what X would think of this. Let me text Y and see if she's available. Let me run this by Z before we finalize. And then waiting until that missing individual is present or has provided input before deciding. And you could think about what are other phrases that you could use to bring new stakeholders into a decision as you're, say, sitting in a meeting or looking at an email thread, right? Because this is practically how inclusive decision making happens, is that you kind of see a decision on the horizon and you think, ooh, these people aren't being included even though they're affected, and then you have to, shift the direction of the decision. Another tactic, being a savvy ally. So ways to ask others to be included, right? If you are someone who is empowered to already be included in the decision, how can you spread out that kind of realm of inclusion? So speaking up during a meeting, acting a decision maker, so that when someone leading a decision-making process, to hang back in a Zoom room at the end of the meeting to chat and asking them about including different stakeholders, messaging that person in a Slack, sending an email. And then if you, depending on relationship strength and issue sensitivity, you might say, hey, I know Jim should probably be talking to this group. I don't really know Jim that well. Pam, you seem to know Jim really well. Could you talk to Jim about this, right? So there's just all these different channels of influence that you can use. Feedback and feed bits. Consultation comes in many sizes. So this idea that you can do time appropriate consultations. So if you have a quarter, so 3 months, you could host a workshop and co-design a solution. And that's what we do at Do Big Good. Yay. If you have a month, you could do 5 half-hour Zooms, or this is still pandemic slides, or half-hour, in-person meetings with stakeholders who you think might be positively and negatively affected, to get their input. If you have a week, you could maybe have 2 such meetings. And there I would suggest focusing on people who are at greatest risk of negative impact, right? To ensure that you're minimizing harm in the decision. If you have a day, you can just email stakeholders. If you have an hour, you can Slack or call them, depending if they're internal or external stakeholders. But the idea is that there's, regardless of the time you have to make a decision, there's always some way to be more inclusive and get more stakeholder input. And then there's this little prompt in the corner. What are factors that would increase or decrease the likelihood of a frank response, right? Which is why we started with trust, right? Because you could ask someone in a month what they think, and if they're not going to trust you, then they're not going to tell you, right? So we start with trust, but definitely asking is only part of it. And I think this is our last tactic, and then there's a summary slide, and then we'll go into an activity. So microdosing consultations, checking in frequently to save time at the end. So wanting to over communicate. So consultation can feel overwhelming when there's many decisions that have already been made without stakeholder input. And that we call that at Do Be Good, we call that a consultation backlog, right? So to avoid that, there's all these tiny ways that you can, in your everyday work as a manager, be including people, right? And be accepting feedback. So for example, in any meeting, calendar invite, when you have the agenda, in the calendar invite, you just add for your additions and make the calendar invite editable, right? So then even if people don't edit, and I do this, people never edit the agenda, but I like to think they're at least seeing, oh, I also have a say in what we're going to do in this meeting. Beginning a meeting by saying the agenda, right? Just good management. And then what else do we need to cover, right? So people can influence the agenda at the meeting. In a meeting, when you're giving your opinion about something, saying, does that sound right? So you're saying there's some fluidity in my perspective, right? That is influenceable by you, my stakeholder. And then at the end of the meeting, saying anything else. So it's like, there's some fluidity in what we're doing here that's influenceable by you, my stakeholder. And think of like, what are other easy opportunities for checking in that you can just integrate into your daily life. So if you want to screenshot the slide, this is the summary of the tactics. Oh, I see. Interesting. So I said the self-prompt and the trust dials are separate tactics. Okay, that's fine. Taking action, everyone looks alike, choosing your channel of influence, doing time appropriate consultations, and then doing ongoing micro checks. So now we're going to do another small group activity. It's 15 minutes and we have 15 minutes. So we'll do it for the full time. And the question is, the prompt is, what's a decision I can influence to make it more inclusive right now? So this is something actually happening in your work, or it could be personal life, if that's more relevant. So you're going to take 2 minutes to self-reflect and identify a decision from your own experience. As a group, you're going to select one decision to workshop together. So everyone will share the decision, and then you'll choose one to talk about together to really dig into. And then for the remaining 10 minutes, as a group, you're going to brainstorm ways that that group member can take action to make that particular decision more inclusive. So are there any questions about the activity? And you will be, again, with the same people that you were with before. Okay. All right. Yes. So please go back into your rooms. I will set a timer for 15 minutes. And thank you to Camille for the feedback. I will make sure not to talk here so as not to interrupt you. So go ahead. Okay, so sorry to interrupt you all in the midst of your brainstorm. Hopefully you were able to come to some conclusions. So please head back to the workshop room, whatever feels most natural. Come back to, we won't be using the Jitsi room again, so you can close that tab. So for the last 9 minutes, I would definitely like to hear from you. So thank you for using chat. I often use chat as a facilitator because it helps with pace. And I did want to make sure we got through everything, but we have gotten through everything. So yeah, I would love to hear what you learned and how everything went. So yeah, please use your use the hand raise icon, or Ishay, you can, however you have people say.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. Okay. Yes, Emma. Yes, go ahead, Emma.
Hi, is everybody able to hear me? I think I'm unmuted. Yes, okay. So during our breakout group, we kind of focused on solving one of the issues I'm having at the moment. I work with an organization that supports government-assisted refugees in Ontario. And one of the projects that I'm working on at the moment is kind of a housing outreach program. As part of what we do, we help government-assisted refugees search for their first permanent accommodation in the region that we work in. And as with a lot of other places right now, we're seeing really a lack of affordability, discrimination in the housing market against our clients who are on government assistance, who don't have previous landlord references, don't have Canadian credit history. And just the lack of affordability combined with a low vacancy rate is making that really challenging. So we are planning kind of an outreach to both landlords to encourage them to rent to newcomers, as well as developing resources for our clients to increase housing stability. So things that focus on ensuring that our clients know their rights and responsibilities as tenants so that they're not taken advantage of, that sort of thing. So I was kind of discussing one of the issues that we face in dealing with the population that we serve is that refugees, the clients that we serve, are not a homogenous group at all. The resettlement experience.
So Emma, I'm just going to pause you just to give enough time to have multiple people share. Could you talk about the tactics that you decided on?
Yep.
Thank you.
So the tactics that we kind of decided on to get all of the different viewpoints of the clients that we serve was one suggestion was a community health worker model. So having community leads for these different groups in our community, and giving kind of a stipend for their time as well, acknowledging the importance of their time so that we do reach these different individual kind of communities that we represent.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yes, and I should have given more guidance. So yeah, just to so that we can share multiple examples, and let's do 2 more to focus on sharing the tactics so that we can see some of those examples in context. So yes, does anyone else want to share some of the tactics that they're going to try for their inclusive decision-making process? And again, raise your hand. Okay, I'm going to read from Abby. Didn't get to tactics. Pondering the question of how to define who is most affected. Staff of the short-term impacts as the doers of the work. Okay, maybe stakeholders, but the community is impacted as the long-term impacts of the actual services. So maybe long-term stakeholders. How to prioritize and balance those interests. Okay, so you had a conversation about that. Yep, fair enough. Does anyone else want to give an example of what they came up with? Okay. Okay, well, we could go, we have 4 minutes left, so we could just go into Q&A. And also, if you don't have a question and you need to head out, that's also okay. So thank you so much for participating. If you have time, I would love to hear your feedback